At Tulalip, we have great respect for our culture and traditions. However, due to an ongoing government policy of assimilation during the first half of the 20th century, our native language Lushootseed almost disappeared. Over the past 25 years, through the great teaching efforts of the Tulalip Lushootseed Language Department, there has been a language revival. Tulalip elder David Spencer Sr., who was raised by his grandparents Katie and Ambrose Bagley, is one of the few tribal members left who spoke Lushootseed fluently as his first language when he was a small child. He was reintroduced to Lushootseed in the 1990s through our language department, and he has since written poetry in both English and Lushootseed.
Behave now.
His book, Lifted to the Edge, The Reflections of a Tulalip Grandson, was published in 2011 and describes his life and experience as a Tulalip tribal member. Today, David talks about growing up at Tulalip and how he became an artist, writer, and poet. Welcome to Hibulb Conversations. I'm Tessa Campbell, Senior Curator here at the Hibulb Cultural Center. Today, we're here with David Spencer Sr., artist, poet, writer, and tribal member. Welcome, David. Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for letting me share some of my life experience.
So, David, were you born at Tulalip, and when was that?
I was born at Tulalip Indian Hospital on June 7th, 1937. And my mother died June 13, 1937. And from what I understand from my grandma Katie Bagley, that they determined that I was going to die too, so they shoved me in some utility room. And my grandma Katie and her husband Ambrose Bagley took me from the hospital. They brought me up to the ranch on 116th Street, and the Indian 1910 Shakers worked over me.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was my start of my life.
So that we're fortunate that my great-grandparents took you home.
Oh, yes.
And then you were raised in the home with my aunts and uncles and my father. Do you think they raised you to be more aware of cultural traditions than other children growing up at that time?
I believe so, especially from Grandma Katie. She's the one that really brought on the teachings. And I think my sister Nancy and I were being raised the old traditional way, where the woman or the mother or grandmother raises the child until they reach about 13 or 14. Then after that, the dads, the uncles, the grandfather takes over. But in my case, Grandma Katie died when I was 13. So my grandpa Ambrose and I were bachelors until he passed away in July 6th of 1956. And Grandma Katie died October 30th, 1950.
So were they very strict with you?
Oh, Grandma Katie was pretty strict on me. When I misbehaved, and she would just say, it's Hibulb. And I knew, okay, that's when you learn to stand tall, be quiet, behave, be humble, be respectful. That's all she had to say to me. I could be in a crowd of people, she could whisper it to me. It's Hibulb. And I knew what that meant, and Nancy knew what that meant.
And you straightened up, right?
And the strange thing about my discipline, Grandma Katie was the one that enforced it. Grandpa Ambrose never corrected her or never disciplined me at all. Even after she died, his teachings were hints, the hints of behavior. Of course, I like that. I didn't get no lectures. Actually, he only lectured me 4 times. One time I I cursed out one of my cousins. He chased me around, and I crawled underneath my Uncle Bill's truck, and he poked me with a broom. I never wanted to hear those words again. I was totally terrified. Because like I say in the book, he never expressed anger at all. I think the most important one was the evening I was getting graduated from high school. He didn't want me to quit learning, but continue my learning. He says, that's one thing you cannot take away from you, anything that you learned. When I started to beat sing, I started to rush out to the house, and he pulled up a chair, told me to sit down, and he started talking to me about that I must work hard and do the best I can so my name can carry up and down the beaches that I was a hard worker. And sure enough, the following year, I got another job. Of course, it was with my cousin, Ray Shelton Sr. But I had no problem getting a job after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what are your first memories, your early memories?
Some of my early memories was when we lived up to 116th Street Ranch. I had to be at least 4 or 5. And I could remember they having shakes up there because they had the large living room that was used for shaker meetings. And the dining room was a huge dining room. So I remember all the shakers like coming up there and sitting there listening to sing and dance with the bells, like I loved to hear. And also there was a root cellar. I loved going down in there and get some fruit or something. I think most of the women didn't want to go down there because there'd be spider webs all over the place, but I just loved playing down there. Being a ranch, I could remember going out to orchard and climb up trees, apple trees, cherry trees. Of course, after the fruit. My sister Grace and Ruth, you tell me I got stuck up on a tree one time. They wouldn't help me down and left me up there crying. I remember that pretty well.
So you grew up speaking Lushootseed at home?
Yes. My sister Grace and my cousin Pauline Johnny Badrock told me that I was speaking the Lushootseed language when I was really young, like 6, 7. But when we moved down to my Aunt Cattie's house and Uncle Bill's house, the Campbell family didn't speak the language. They understood it. And so that's where I kind of lost it somewhat.
So we've talked about your traditional education growing up. Now let's talk about your formal education. So where did you go to school?
I went to Marysville School District. All the schools were on one block. The Lincoln Building was for elementary. That was on the east side. In the middle was the high school. And on the west side along State Street was the junior high. And at that time, the school was pretty small. You knew everybody, or you knew who they were. Plus you had your particular friends and cousins. Of course, I graduated in June 8, 1956. I was 19. My birthday's on the 7th, so I grew up graduated as an older student.
And what was your favorite subject in school?
I enjoyed English, and of course, I just loved art. Fred Mesmer was my art teacher for his first 3 years, and John Ringen was my art teacher in my senior year.
And you just reconnected with John Ringer
Oh,
this
yes.
summer.
Yeah, this summer I got to see him again and chit-chat with him. Same old guy, used to have that little wit about him.
Mm-hmm.
Senior class, there was only Arlie Williams and I. That was it. 2 people.
So you won a scholarship to Everett Junior College. What did you study there?
I received an Everett Junior College work scholarship, and I had a Yakima scholarship for 4 years. And I studied art, just general art to start out with. But I couldn't cope with the living arrangements. I only went 4 quarters. My sister Ruth moved in, and all of a sudden, you know, I was exposed to a life standard I wasn't used to, and that was alcoholism. Mm-hmm. And it pretty broke down the household a little bit, because Grandpa stopped praying in the morning. Every morning he used to get up, 6 o'clock, clink, clink, clink at the altar, and he'll pray and chant. And all of a sudden that wasn't there anymore. I could come home, there was no time to study, no place to study. So I just dropped out of school and joined the service.
David, thank you so much for sharing your history. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Hibulb Conversations. We're here talking with David Spencer Sr. about his life at Tulalip. Mm-hmm. So David, tell us about your wife, Viola.
Oh, my high school sweetheart. When she was in the hospital, she had breast cancer and he passed away from it. But when we were in the hospital, so she could sit up, I had my back to her and she puts her back to me. And one of her sisters, I don't know which one, Lillian or Marion, asked her when we start going together. She said, summer of 1954, and I thought to myself, really? I didn't know that. But we were childhood sweethearts, I think, starting when I was a junior and she was a freshman.
And then you guys got married, and when was that?
We got married in April 7th, 1958. I came home, I was in the service then, I came home from, on a leave and we got married. Then I left right away to go Fort Monmouth for my electrical and electronic training. From there I went down to Redstone Arsenal for my Nike missile and Hercules. That was down south. I found that quite interesting. That was during the time they had bathrooms for white, bathrooms for colored, and then I used to think, well, where does the Indian go then? It was just, they just didn't know what to do or how to accept me, so I just stayed on the base.
All right, so let's talk about your poetry. When did you first start writing?
I got to mention, I saw an article, I don't know if it was in Look magazine or Life magazine, that featured Sylvia Plath when she died in '63. They had some poems in there I just loved because they were short. And I didn't really get started until maybe, I think my early poems are in the early '70s. I would just write them for the family. They're just short little things. And then I did a lot of research on Sylvia, and plus the poets that influenced her. Then the poets that influenced her, I studied them. Then I had a good friend when I was working for a General Telephone Company. He was a poet. And we were talking one time during lunch break, and he says, David, you've got to quit reading other poets. Stop immediately and write your own thoughts. Write your own experiences about your own lives. And that is when I really got serious. And so I took 4 classes of poetry at University of Washington. And since I had all this background in my research, I did real good. All 4.0 grades on my poetry. And that's the start of it. And then in I believe it was 1990, Viola bought me this Lusuchi dictionary. Mm-hmm. Oh, my mind went crazy. I remember looking through that book and remembered words, and I'd look at them, look them up. I couldn't figure how to pronounce all these characters, the alphabet. And then I was fortunate, my mentor, Toby Landon, started a class in '91 in the Catholic Annex building, and that's where I got started. Mm-hmm. Then the word game became important. Learning Lusutsi so I can write poetry in Lusutsi. And I don't remember how many classes I took. I think I took all the 100 series, maybe 2 of that 200 series. And I would go to the culture center almost every day, and talk with the Lusutsi student teachers. And one time, there was an opening for a Lusutsi teacher. I applied for it. And I panicked or something, just, I don't want to go back to the workforce again, 40 hours a week. So I pulled my application, and Toby Landon says, why did you pull your language applications? I don't want to work 40 hours a week. And so she offered me, okay, 20 hours. She asked me, what would you do to work for the language department? And half jokingly, I said, 20 hours at home. And they must have discussed it for a couple hours, or a couple of weeks, and okay, you're hired. Oh, what I get myself into. Well, I'm working at home. I don't have to get dressed and look presentable at work. And so they hired me. And I just kind of wrote up some lessons, at home, or looked at some of her stuff, her curriculum, and I think I worked for at least 3 years or so. I stopped because my wife had passed away. Viola passed away in 1997. I worked for about another 6-7 months, and I just dropped out. But it really wasn't lost time for Lusutsi. Lusutsi became my therapy. I went to their dictionary, wrote everything about prefixes, suffixes. They actually made kind of a dictionary of the fixes. And then I started to translate stories from Auntie Susie's book. And then I translated Father Charoux's lessons. From there, I went and translated Dr. Buchanan's lessons. And then I went on to, I don't remember how to pronounce it, Condorance, it's where you analyze how our elders use their verbs. And or their adjective. That was really a challenging thing. You know, I was looking at Martha Lamont, Hagen Sam, and I believe Ruth Shelton's work. Then I kind of stopped there. And I was putting in probably from 12, 16 hours days on the Tutsi.
Wow.
I was devoted, but that was my, like I say, my therapy. Then I wrote stories for myself and songs.
Wow.
Once I learned the language, I started singing songs.
And what do you think of the Lushootseed language program today, and where do you see it going?
Oh, I think it's great. They got some great teachers. And I'm always disappointed when I see a former teacher move on to another job because their pay doesn't match the talent and the skill it takes to know a language to turn around and teach it. I don't think our board of directors realize how much effort there is to learn the language. They got a great program now, and I think they're doing great. Of course, the Lushootseed web site is great. And Dave Cinco says they're going to make a page for me. I'm kind of excited about that, where I can post some of my stuff. I thought, well, I can post my poetry, and I get to post some of my videos on there. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you for sharing such great information with us. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Hibulb Conversations. We're here with David Spencer Sr. So David, we have your books here. Mm-hmm. And are these published in English and Lushootseed?
Just went about my collection of Lushootseed poems. I think there's some in my Elders' Abandonment words, maybe. The poets of my is a Tulalip widower. We're basically about being a caretaker and a widower after my wife passed away. It was pretty heart-wrenching. And I used to have a calendar, a desk calendar, and I used to write a poem every day. You know. And I think the second one was the Lushootseed poems. My last one was Elder Abandonment. And I know a lot of people didn't like the title, especially the seniors and elders. They thought it was too close to death and all that. The fear of getting old, I believe. Because any culture, I don't matter what culture it is, there's elders that walk alone. You know, you can see them uptown, anywhere. They're all alone. They just walk by themselves. I've gone to tribal gatherings down here. I see an elder sitting alone. I know that elder's from a huge family. Always somebody walk by and say, hello, how are you? Then walk away, or just get a head nod, because I experienced that myself. That's why I latched on to the elder abandonment. And there I'll say, watch out for your elders, take care of your elders. And I sit there and think, wow. But some elders are fortunate. They got families that are really caring. You know, it just kind of makes me sad to see an elder from a big family just sit there.
Mm-hmm. So if people can come hear your poetry on Thursdays, you come first Thursday of every month. Do you read poetry?
I try to.
Here at Hibulb? Yeah.
Yeah, my mate, Catherine Campbell, kind of pushes me all the time. Are you going to read tonight? Mm-hmm. Are you going to read tonight? Oh, okay. Go loud, how? Behave now. Go, let's, ill how. Oh, Lil Hill, Quid, Chai, Botis, Sachel, Abiloched, Supat Udhap, God Galad Hap. Oh, Luckot, eat chuch. Oh, Luckot, eat chuch. Oh, widow, with Galad, widow. Oh, la leo quiz hole. Oh, altia lachea. Hola chas. Bohelo. Now I'm just lost. My feelings are different tonight. Perhaps I'll try to behave now. Oh, you kissed me. Oh, you kissed me. Now I won't behave. No. Oh, my life becomes different tonight. I'm just happy again. But I love reading. I've read poetry down in Seattle. I can't remember the place. CJ Cafe. I read poetry at UW. That was many years ago.
So let's talk about your art now. When did you start drawing and what inspired you?
I gotta say my brother Butch. I was forbidden to go up to my dad's house because of all the alcoholism there. And we had a garden, a vegetable garden across the road, and I used to had to weed it. So I go over and weed the garden. And if I knew Brother Butch was home, I would dash up there and visit and watch him draw. He started out drawing figures from a Sears catalog. He got to the point he could draw somebody, sometimes with hardly any guidelines, except maybe a couple of gestures and lines. Draw the figure and draw the clothing on them, and each clothing has the right place, the right wrinkle, the right tension point on the body. He was really good at that. And then he got into wood carving, and he started carving Shayleys design type totem poles. And he did a lot of carving for the spiritual longhouse. Mainly they're tusteds, you know. And he carved things to sell. I still remember one time we had a big cedar log when I stayed on the Quilceda hilltop. Took his chainsaw, carved out a fisherman. In hardly 2 weeks it was done. And he didn't have all these fancy knives and stuff. He had an axe, a chainsaw. I think he had 2 chisels, and a pocket knife. That's all he had. And he'd create beautiful work. And he sold it to a herb broker. He was the Marysville City Police chief. Apparently, the broker lived out in Tulalip. He'd drive back and forth every day and watch Brother Butch carve. And when he was done, he came up there and offered Brother Butch money to buy it. But he was and another, I think nobody really knows, I was up there visiting my dad, Brother Butch, and I went and talked to Dad, and Dad said, "Oh, you artist. You got a big swelled head, you artist." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He whips out, gets a piece of paper and gets a pencil. Then he starts drawing horses, the ponies from over Yakima, where he's raised, and drew an Indian chief with the feathers and all that, and rough figure. But over all these years, I lost those. And no guidelines or something, he just started drawing horses. They look very realistic. Wow. He's just making fun of us artists, his sons.
So did you learn how to draw and carve from Butch?
Oh, he didn't teach me the lessons, but he gave me a drawing book, a little drawing book, and I used to just draw everything out of there. And then I got to comic books. You know, I draw figures from the comic books. My biggest thing was drawing airplanes and tanks.
So you were self-taught then?
Pretty much, and I found a knife, Grandpa's old electrical knife. It was dull as dull. At first I started to steal potatoes, carved potatoes, and I got in trouble for that because food was very important for the family. But they didn't mind me carving in the cedar, the blocks of cedar, and I started carving cedars. And I remember this one day I was busy whittling. I was sitting in the pump house door, or just in the entrance sitting down. Brother Butch comes up. He feels my knife. He says, "It's dull. Let me sharpen it for you." He always carried a stone in his back pocket. He pulled it out and he goes on it for about 15, 20 minutes. He gives it to me. The first thing I do is cut my finger because the damn knife is so sharp. And I go, oh! And it got to the point where I have we didn't have Band-Aids in those days, so I just tied a little rag around each little finger cut, you know. And he used to joke at me, "How many rings you have are made of cloth? How many rings you got, Dave?" And I said, "Oh, brother, I only got 3 today."
So you combined your art, poetry, and stories of your life growing up to write your book, Lifted to the Edge, which is right here. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us how that came about?
My children, David and Doreen, and my cousins, K.O. and Jeanette, and Wally or Joan, asked me about my life with our grandparents. So I started out, I'll write a little episode on email and send it to them, maybe one a week or a couple of weeks. It got to the point I had a huge stack of those, and somebody mentioned I should make a book about our grandparents. I said, well, okay. And so I took those first emails, and I just going to write it like I wrote the emails, and I thought, no, I'm going to write it like the old traditional storytellers. Circular pattern, repeating the words and sentence, you know. And so that's how I wrote the whole book, circular pattern, like the old traditional storytellers. And with my background as a poet, I had a lot of fun. Became a word game too.
Do you have any plans to write another book?
It has passed through my mind, yes. But I want to write some children's stories. I have, I don't know, about 15, 16 Lusuchi stories that I've created. And I'd love to make those into a book. But I get stuck on this part where every time you see a Lusuchi story, or some, they're kind of cartoonish. That bothers me. How could you make them look respectful, you know, carrying some dignity about it? That's where my biggest drawback. You know, I want to have the stories have power. That's very important for me.
It has been such a pleasure talking with you today, David. Thank you for being here. I'm Tessa Campbell. Thank you for watching Hibulb Conversations.